The wind whistles across the English countryside. A tiny boy in thick glasses stares out his bedroom window, watching the rain fall on the grey streets of Cheltenham. Michael Edwards, not yet Eddie the Eagle, is 8 years old. And tonight he decides he's going to the Olympics. He doesn't know how. He doesn't know in what sport. But in his mind, the medals shine brighter than the rain. While other kids dream of becoming footballers or rock stars, Eddie dreams of standing on a podium, the Union Jack rising, the anthem echoing. He tapes pictures of Olympic champions on his wall. Sepcos, ski racers, even figure skaters. Anything with the 5 rings. At school the teachers laugh. He's clumsy, nearsighted, terrible at running. But Eddie doesn't care. He keeps a notebook where he writes, Olympics, someday. Years pass. He tries football. Fails. He tries swimming. Nearly drowns. He tries running, but his legs can't keep up. By 16 the dream looks impossible. Then one winter morning he sees something on television. A man soaring through the air on skis, weightless, fearless, flying. The announcer says the words ski jumping. And Eddie, sitting in a small English living room, whispers, "That's it. Ski jumping isn't something people do in Cheltenham. There are no mountains, no snow, no coaches." But Eddie's father, a plasterer, has an old van. So Eddie fills it with borrowed gear and drives to Europe. He sleeps in the van, eats beans from a can, and trains. Every fall bruises him. Every jump teaches him. The Austrians laugh at him. The Germans call him crazy. But the Norwegians, the ones who understand the mountains, see something different, heart. One old coach with snow in his beard tells him, "You don't jump for medals. You jump for the feeling." Eddie nods. He already knows. Back home no one believes him. His mother smiles and says, "You're mad, Michael." His father shakes his head. You can't make money flying off hills. But Eddie isn't chasing money. He's chasing flight. At night, in the cold of the van, he writes in his diary, "If I can't be the best, I'll be the one who never gives up." It becomes his creed. He starts entering competitions, small local events at first. He comes in last. Every time. But each jump he lands a little steadier. And every failure makes him laugh louder. By his early 20s, Eddie has a plan. If Britain doesn't have a ski jumping team, he'll be the team himself. He calls the British Olympic Committee. They think it's a prank. But when he shows up, helmet dented, skis mismatched, they can't ignore him. "You can't represent Britain," they say. "You're not qualified." So Eddie does what no one expects. He goes to qualify. He travels across Europe again, from Innsbruck to Garmisch to St. Moritz, collecting points, competing anywhere that would let him. He crashes, breaks helmets, and runs out of money. He takes odd jobs to survive: plasterer, ski lift operator, dishwasher. At night, he practices on smaller hills when no one is watching. Sometimes the snowplow men let him jump once before they close the slope. They call him the Crazy Englishman. But slowly, the Crazy Englishman starts to fly. In 1986, Eddie qualifies for the British national team, mostly because no one else wants to. He becomes officially Great Britain's first Olympic ski jumper. The press ignores it. The federation rolls its eyes. But Eddie doesn't care. For him, the dream is alive. He sews the Union Jack onto his jacket, tapes his glasses to his helmet, and tells the world, "See you in Calgary." Back in Cheltenham, his parents watch the news. For a moment, even his father can't believe it. The same boy who could barely run is going to the Olympics, flying off mountains. Eddie trains harder than ever. He builds strength with old bricks, runs up hills in army boots, and sleeps in a shed near the ski jumps. He's broke. His equipment is secondhand. His goggles fog up before every run. But every day he gets closer. He sends letters to sponsors. Most don't reply. One company sends him a pair of gloves. He writes back, "Thank you. That's one less thing to borrow." In early 1988, the world prepares for the Winter Olympics. For the first time in 60 years, Britain will have a ski jumper. Reporters finally notice, not because he's good but because he's terrible. They call him the worst Olympian ever. Eddie smiles and says, "At least I'm an Olympian." The crowd laughs. He doesn't mind. He's about to prove that being last can still mean everything. It's January 1988. Eddie is standing in the airport, clutching a battered pair of skis wrapped in tape and dreams. The reporters crowd around him. "Do you really think you can win a medal?" one of them asks, laughing. Eddie smiles behind his fogged-up glasses. "No," he says. "But I can try." The laughter turns into headlines. The Daily Mail calls him a lovable fool. The Times writes, "Britain's answer to a snowman with courage." Every joke, every insult, he turns into fuel. He boards the plane to Calgary with a single suitcase, a sleeping bag, and a heart full of impossible belief. When he lands in Canada, the cold bites like a knife. It's colder than anything he's ever known. The kind of cold that makes metal sing. He walks into the Olympic Village, surrounded by athletes with perfect posture and perfect uniforms. Their boots are sponsored. Their jackets are embroidered. Eddie's jacket still smells faintly of plaster and home. The other athletes stare. They've never seen a jumper like him. Thick glasses, crooked smile, old equipment. One Norwegian whispers, "He'll die out there." Eddie grins. Not today. Training begins. Every morning before dawn, he trudges through the snow, carrying his skis across the frozen path. The real jumpers glide past him like ghosts. Eddie waves anyway. His equipment is ancient. Boots held together by tape, goggles fogged from the cold, skis chipped and worn. But when he stands at the top of the ramp, when he looks down that long silver track of ice, he feels the same thrill as the legends who came before him. He may not jump far, but he'll jump honestly. The British Olympic Committee, embarrassed by the attention, tries to distance itself. "We didn't send him," they claim. But it's too late. The cameras love him. Every time Eddie walks into the press area, the microphones light up. He talks about his mum, about beans for dinner, about chasing dreams. He speaks like a child in a world of cynics. And the world listens. The first qualifying round arrives. The snow falls heavy that morning. Thick, slow flakes that look like ash against the floodlights. Eddie climbs the tower, his heart hammering. He's surrounded by the best jumpers on earth. Jens Weissflog, Matti Nikkanen, and dozens of others whose names echo across the slopes. They've trained since they could walk. Eddie trained in a car park. He adjusts his goggles, steps up to the gate. The wind cuts across the ramp. The crowd murmurs. The judge nods. He goes. For a heartbeat he's flying. The skis slice through the air, the wind screams past his ears. And for those few seconds there is no ridicule, no doubt, no fear. Just flight. He lands hard, skids, nearly falls. The crowd gasps, then cheers. He finishes last. But he's alive. And that's enough. The next day, newspapers across the world explode with headlines. The Eagle has landed. Eddie soars into Olympic history and finishes last. He becomes an overnight sensation. TV crews chase him through the village. Kids make paper eagles with his name on them. The crowd chants, "Eddie, Eddie, Eddie." For a brief moment, he's the most famous man at the Olympics. And all he did was try. In the evenings, Eddie sits alone in the cafeteria, his dinner tray piled with free bread and soup. Athletes pass by, some still snickering. But others, quietly, respectfully, stop to shake his hand. Because deep down they understand. They know the price of the dream. One night, a Finnish jumper tells him, "You have no medals, but you have something none of us do, courage." Eddie laughs. Courage doesn't help you land better. The Finn smiles. Maybe not. But it helps you get back up. The next event comes, the 120-meter jump, the biggest of them all. The ramp towers above the trees like a blade of ice. Even the professionals fear it. But Eddie? He's grinning. He knows he's going to crash. He just doesn't care. As he climbs the tower, his breath fogs in the freezing air. The lights of Calgary shimmer below, gold and white like a city of ghosts. The crowd is enormous, chanting his name again. The TV commentators can't stop laughing. He looks down the ramp, whispers to himself. Once more. For everyone who ever tried. He launches. The wind howls, the ground rushes up, and for one perfect heartbeat, he's flying again. Longer this time. Smoother. Almost beautiful. He lands with a thunderous crack, skis wobbling, arms flailing, but he stands. The stadium erupts. Flags wave. Cameras flash. Eddie the Eagle has just completed his greatest jump. Still last. But somehow greater than gold. When he walks off the field, reporters surround him. How does it feel to be last again? He grins, breath steaming in the cold. At least I finished. That line becomes legend. The world falls in love with the man who refused to give up. Back in England, pubs cheer his name. Kids wear fake glasses and call themselves Eddies. He's invited to talk shows, interviews, even cartoons. In a world obsessed with winning, Eddie reminds people what matters: trying. When Eddie returns home to Britain, the crowd waiting for him at the airport is larger than any he has ever seen. Hundreds of fans, kids, parents, reporters, holding signs that read, "Fly, Eddie, fly." He walks out with his skis over his shoulder, blinking under the camera lights. And for the first time in his life he feels like he belongs. He's no longer the plasterer who jumped off small hills in borrowed boots. He's an Olympian. A symbol. A story people needed to believe in. Television stations line up to interview him. Late-night hosts joke with him, calling him the bird who forgot how to land. He laughs every time. He knows what they don't, that he didn't come for medals. He came for the feeling of flight. Eddie becomes a global celebrity. He signs autographs in shopping malls, appears on talk shows in America, even records a pop single. The lyrics are simple. Fly, Eddie, fly, higher than you ever tried. It's silly, it's sweet, and it sells. He meets stars, politicians, athletes. And yet, when he's home, sitting in his parents' small kitchen in Cheltenham, he's still the same guy with foggy glasses and a grin. His mother keeps his newspaper clippings in a biscuit tin. His father shakes his head, smiling. "You've gone from plaster to plasters on your knees," he jokes. Eddie laughs. "Worth it, Dad." But not everyone is laughing. The Olympic officials aren't amused. To them, Eddie represents something dangerous. An amateur breaking into a professional world. He didn't win, but he won the people. And that, for some, is worse than losing. In 1990, the International Olympic Committee quietly changes the qualification rules. Now, jumpers need to achieve a certain ranking in international competitions to even enter the games. They call it the Eddie the Eagle rule. Eddie's dream is grounded. He will never compete in the Olympics again. When the news breaks, reporters rush for a quote. They expect anger. Instead, Eddie smiles. "They can take away my spot," he says. "But they can't take away my jump." Life moves on. The cameras fade. The fame drifts away like snow melting in the sun. Eddie goes back to plastering walls, driving old vans, living quietly. But wherever he goes, someone recognizes him. In supermarkets, people whisper, "That's the Eagle." Kids stop him in the street. He always smiles, signs, and says thank you. He never forgets that once the world believed in him. In the years that follow, his story becomes legend. Books, documentaries, even a Hollywood film, all inspired by the man who turned last place into triumph. Eddie attends the premiere in 2016. As the lights dim, he watches his life play out on screen. Taron Egerton plays him with the same crooked smile. The crowd laughs, then cries. When the credits roll, everyone stands and claps. Eddie wipes a tear and whispers, "Still flying." But beyond the laughter and fame, something deeper remains. Eddie's story changes how people see the Olympics. Not as a contest of perfection, but as a celebration of courage. He showed that victory isn't measured in meters or seconds, but in the distance between fear and faith. He proved that trying, truly trying, is its own kind of gold. In 2018, 30 years after Calgary, Eddie returns to the ski jump for a commemorative event. The ramp looks smaller now, but the air feels the same, cold, electric, full of possibility. He straps on his old boots, worn and cracked, and climbs the tower. The crowd is smaller, but their cheers are just as warm. A child on the sidelines waves a handmade sign. "Fly again, Eddie." He grins, looks down the slope. And for a moment he's 24 again. The misfit who refused to give up. He doesn't jump that day. He doesn't have to. He's already in flight. In the memory of millions who saw in him a piece of themselves. The dreamer, the underdog, the one who dares. When asked, years later, what he remembers most about Calgary, Eddie doesn't mention the cold, the crashes, or the laughter. He just says, "When I was flying, I felt free." Time is a strange thing. It blurs the noise, fades the lights, and leaves only the truth. For Eddie Edwards, time has done exactly that. The jokes are forgotten. The laughter is quiet. What remains is the lesson. In every Olympic generation since 1988, there has been at least one athlete who carried Eddie's flame. The swimmer who didn't qualify for the final but smiled through tears. The runner who came last but refused to quit. The ski jumper who fell, stood, and saluted the crowd. Each one of them, knowingly or not, carried a bit of the eagle in their heart. Because Eddie's flight was never about distance, it was about defiance. He dared to stand where no one thought he should. He showed the world that even if you don't soar high, you can still rise. In interviews, people always ask him, "Do you wish you'd won a medal?" He always laughs. "I already did." They never quite understand. They look for the medal, not the meaning. But Eddie knows the truth. His medal wasn't gold, silver, or bronze. It was the sound of that crowd in Calgary, the thousands chanting his name not because he won, but because he tried. That sound, that roar, was the sound of the world remembering what the Olympics were supposed to be. The word Olympic comes from ancient Greece, from the gods and heroes who sought perfection. But perfection isn't human. Perseverance is. And in that sense, Eddie Edwards was more Olympian than most champions ever could be. He didn't have coaches or sponsors. He didn't have money or training. What he had was something far rarer: the ability to keep laughing after every fall. In his old training notes, written on the back of plaster invoices, he once scribbled, "If you don't risk the fall, you'll never feel the flight." Those words could be carved into marble. They are the gospel of the dreamer. Years later, Eddie would speak at schools, community halls, and sports clubs across the world. He never lectured. He just told his story. How he slept in a van, jumped with borrowed skis, and still made it to the Olympics. Kids would crowd around him afterward, eyes wide, asking, "How did you do it?" He'd smile and say, "One jump at a time." The thing about Eddie's story is that it breaks every rule of heroism. There's no dramatic victory, no gold medal moment. His story ends where most others begin. In the fall, in the failure, in the landing that almost didn't happen. But that's what makes it timeless. Because every person who's ever tried and stumbled knows what that feels like. Every dreamer who's been laughed at sees themselves in his crooked grin. Eddie's story isn't about flying high. It's about daring to leave the ground. In 2020, during an interview, a journalist asks Eddie, "If you could tell your younger self one thing before that first jump, what would it be?" He pauses. His hair is gray now. His glass is thicker. But his smile is exactly the same. He says, "Don't look down." Over the years, the name Eddie the Eagle has become a metaphor. Teachers use it to inspire students. Coaches tell it to their teams before big games. Parents whisper it to their children on hard days. Because somewhere between the laughter and the legend, Eddie taught the world that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about jumping anyway. In 2021, the British Olympic team invited him to address new athletes heading to the Winter Games. He stood in front of them, some born decades after his flight, and said softly, "You'll all be remembered for your victories. But don't forget, the world also remembers your courage." The room was silent. For a moment, even the youngest among them understood. Because they weren't just inheriting medals. They were inheriting meaning. That night, as he walked out into the crisp air, snow began to fall again. Soft, silent, endless. He looked up and thought of Calgary. Of the ramp, the cold, the fear. And the moment when everything else disappeared. He closed his eyes and smiled. "I'm still flying. The world moves fast. Heroes come and go. Names rise, glitter, and fade into the noise of history. But every once in a while, one name stays, not because of triumph, but because of truth." Eddie Edwards never stood on an Olympic podium. He never felt the weight of a gold medal. He never heard his anthem echo through the snow. But he heard something far greater, the heartbeat of a crowd that saw itself in him. When Eddie jumped, he carried more than his own dream. He carried the dream of every person who's ever been told, "You're not good enough." And that's why, all these years later, his flight still matters. The story of Eddie the Eagle isn't about sport. It's about the human spirit. It's about the fragile, unstoppable fire that burns in anyone who dares to believe. You see, Eddie didn't just jump off a ramp. He jumped out of the limits of what the Olympics had become. A place for perfection. He reminded us that imperfection is beautiful too. Because when he stood at the edge of that slope in Calgary, when he looked down that endless strip of ice, he wasn't thinking about the cameras, the medals, or the laughter. He was thinking, "This is my moment." And he took it. For decades, Olympic historians have tried to define what happened that winter in 1988. Some call it a joke. Others call it a miracle. But if you look closely, if you listen to the silence between the cheers, you'll understand. It was neither. It was a reminder that the games at their heart were never meant to be perfect. They were meant to be human. In a world obsessed with winning, Eddie's flight was a rebellion. It said, trying is enough. It said, courage matters. It said, even if you fall, you've flown further than those who never tried. And that's why his story endures. Not as a footnote, but as a chapter. When people remember the Winter Olympics of 1988, they remember the champions. Matti Nykänen, Katarina Witt, Brian Boitano. But in every replay, every archive, there's one image that always returns. A British man with foggy goggles, raising his arms in triumph, smiling like a child who just touched the sky, and the crowd roaring back, not because he won, but because he reminded them what it feels like to dream. If you stand today on the hill in Calgary, the wind still hums the same cold song. You can almost hear the echo of the announcer, the gasp of the crowd, the laughter, the tears. Somewhere in that air, Eddie is still flying. Years later, a journalist once asked him, "Eddie, what would you say to someone who's afraid to try?" He thought for a moment and said quietly, "The worst thing that can happen is you fall. But the best thing that can happen is you fly." And maybe that's the truth the world keeps forgetting. That courage isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the sound of one man breathing deep before a jump no one thought he could make. It's the silence before the takeoff, the whisper before the wind. It's Eddie the Eagle, alone at the top of the world, smiling into the snow, ready to fall, ready to fly. Fade out. The crowd's roar fades to a soft echo. Snow falls gently over the Olympic ramp. A single pair of ski tracks cut through the white. And a voice, steady, honest, unbreakable, says, "You don't have to win to be remembered. You just have to try." That's the story of Eddie the Eagle. The man who failed gloriously. The man who fell and flew. The man who showed the world what the Olympics are truly about. The snow settles. The cheers fade. But the story never really ends. Because somewhere out there, another dreamer is standing at the edge of their own ramp. Nervous. Alone. Ready to jump. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remember Eddie. The man who didn't have the right gear. Or the perfect body. Or the medals. But had something rarer. The courage to try. He showed us that the greatest victories aren't written in gold. They're written in heart. So wherever you are, whatever your dream is, don't wait for permission. Don't listen to the laughter. Just jump. 'Cause you never know. You might just fly.